Our next speaker is Mariam Vardanyan. Mariam graduated from the Yerevan State University in 2000 and in 2002 got the degree of Masters of Art from the same university. Since 2002, she is a lecturer in UNESCO, Chair of History and Theory of Armenian Art at the Yerevan State University. Now, she is preparing her doctoral thesis about silver art of Garin Erzurum Area Silver School. She is interested in the production of all centers of the Armenian silver art, and now is teaching Armenian silver art at the Department of Art History of Yerevan State University. Mariam is the author of more than 20 articles about Armenian painters and sculptors in Sauer Allgemeines Künstlerlexikon. She has been invited to Bucharest, Romania by the head of Armenian Church in Romania to study the silver artifacts in the Museum of the Armenian Church there. Presently, she is making a catalog about these. Her talk is about Armenian silversmiths and goldsmiths of Ottoman Empire. Mariam, please.
Բարև ձեզ։ Նախ թույլ տվեք խորին շնորհակալությունս հայտնել այս ձեռնարկի կազմակերպիչներին եւ ինձ այստեղ մասնակցելու հնարավորություն տալու համար եւ հատկապես Տիկին Մանգասարյանին։ So, Armenian silversmiths and goldsmiths of the Ottoman Empire. Loud? Okay. The silver and gold industry was the monopoly of Armenian masters in the Ottoman Empire. During the ages, the best silversmiths and goldsmiths were Armenians who have played a very important role for the culture and the economy of the empire. This is evidenced by a collection of gold and silver items that exist in the museums of Turkey and other countries, sold in the antique shops and auctions. The aim of this report is to present the investment of Armenian masters in the developing of gold and silver art of the Ottoman Empire in general, highlighting the most leaders silver schools and masters. The famous Armenian centers of silver and gold art production in the Ottoman Empire were Caesarea, Van, Bitlis, Harbert, Sebastia, Karin, Mush, and others. Կարոքյուրտման, Ovseptokat, Armenak Sagazyan, Harutyun Kurtyan, Shatvorian have mentioned hundreds of Armenian masters' names which had worked in Ottoman Empire. The Armenian goldsmiths have followed each other in the Sultan's palace, keeping the leadership of the Mint of Empire. Among the famous families of royal jewelers were Tuzyans, Papayans, Zingilis, Kirobe Tulumpajoglu, Levon Mazlumian, etc. They were awarded a lot of honors, degrees, medals for talent and devotion. Especially the Armenian masters were making various gifts for European royal families and foreign guests, also the medals of Sultan's palace and Ottoman government. The Ottoman sultans believed that working as craftsmen was not honorable for Muslims. They needed to practice fine arts because they lived during the time of expansion of colonization. So the craftsmanship was left to the Gavurs, such as Greeks and Armenians. On 1534, Sultan Suleiman I had deported to Istanbul Armenian silversmiths and goldsmiths from Van and surroundings. This process was continued by the next sultans too. The first mention about Armenian silversmiths is given in the traveling notes of Turkish historic of 17th century Elvia Çelebi. He has written about two Armenian silversmiths, Khachadurov Unkapan and Aydın. From this period are also mentioned the names of Babazer Gagazian, Ziljan brothers, and Kaspar, who had been forced by Suleiman I from Van to Constantinople. In his work Turkish Diary, written in 1576, the German von Berlach had noted the Armenian silversmiths and goldsmiths, but he hadn't given names. Masters were included in so-called esnafs, trade and craft unions. Meanwhile, jewelry, architecture, and painting were Greeks and Armenians' sphere of activity, which were excellent in this area. Armenian goldsmiths and silversmiths, esnafs in Constantinople, were mentioned starting from the second half of the 18th century. In 1719, out of 103 esnafs, 15 belonged to Armenians. A document from 1872 listed over 200 jewelers from all quarters of Constantinople. The gold and silver industry in Constantinople of later period is mainly connected with the family of Duzian. More than 100 years from 17th century to the second half of 19th century, they held the leadership of the mint of the Ottoman Empire. During this period, all the leading goldsmiths and silversmiths of the sultans from the Duzian family. The most beautiful objects of the Ottoman Empire were produced at the mint, so the Ottoman masterpieces of the 18th and 19th centuries are known as mint works for this reason. In 1819, the head of Ottoman Mint was Ararat-Eskijian. How can I do? Sorry. All the researchers of the Constantinople Silver School have mentioned that starting from the 18th century, the essential artistic feature of Armenian silversmiths and goldsmiths' works was the importation and development of the European style, and especially the styles of Louis XIV, Louis XV, and Louis XVI, which was combined with the Armenian traditions. Baroque art in France provisionally was divided into 4 circles, and each of them was named by the reigning King Louis. These styles are known by the name French Royal style. How did the French Baroque come to the leading style of the Constantinople Silver School? The answer to this question we could find in the History of Ottoman State, written by Bishop Garekin Ayvazovsky. He has shown that in 1720, Ahmed III Sultan sent to France a group of 18 people to be introduced to the achievements of art and techniques. And the members of this group brought the French royal styles to Constantinople. One of the famous masters of Constantinople was Aznavour, who has worked during the rule of Abdulhamid II. Working with the technique of guilloche, Aznavour has made his own style, and his creations were known as Aznavour's works. These are his works with guilloche. Mkrdich Benderian was a great master of engraving. He is the author of Ottoman orders Mecidiye and Osmaniye. On his masterpieces, Mkrdich Benderian has put his mark, Armenian letter M. Unfortunately, the great master died without consigning the secret of his art. Masters of Constantinople of the 18th century improved their skills, especially in the depicting of body, the draping, precising the background, creating a unique composition. Comparing different models of jewelry, method of jewelry, they created real masterpieces. One of the best examples of Constantinople silver and gold art is bindings. There are perfect combinations of taste and harmony. As mentioned above, one of the famous centers of silver and gold art was Caesarea. Many Armenians had come here from Iran, as is known from history. This fact is very important to identify the origins of the traditions imported in art. By the way, the genealogy of famous masters' names lead to Persian roots. For example, Mahdesi Hakob Shahmirian, Mahdesi Karabet Makhasyan, Yeghya Shahbazyan, and so on. There were made many elegant and high-quality silver and gold items by Armenian masters of Caesarea, bindings, ritual items, and luxury jewelries. The masters were using all the gold and silver making techniques, especially the enameled objects are amazing with their perfection, binding, pyxes, and incens vessels, and so on. The earliest masters which are known are Shahmir Mahdesi Karapet, 1653, Karapet and Jacob, 1653, and Malchas Mahdesi Jacob, 1656, from Caesarea. Thanks to the dedicatory inscriptions of the objects, especially in the bindings, we know a large number of masters' names. It is very important to notice that the large part of the Caesarean masters were Mahdesi, what means pilgrims. Studying the examples made by Caesarean masters, we see the great influence of Western art. It is shown in ornaments and in the iconography of skins on bindings. Successfully developing the local and European traditions, the Armenian masters of Caesarea made great contributions in the culture of the countries where they had to move from Caesarea because of various political and economic reasons. Especially these masters have played a great role in developing of the culture of Poland, where they had moved to. Karin or Erzurum was one of the largest craftsmanship cities of medieval Armenia. The production was not only intended for local consumption, but was also largely exported, as well as silver and art items, textile and precious weapons. Especially the weapon making in Karin was of very high quality. Back in the Middle Ages, the silver and goldsmiths of Karin were fluent in chasing, engraving, nielu techniques, but most of all they were famous as masters of filigree or double treating. The other term of this technique later becomes çiftişi. In the first half of the 19th century, many masters of Karin settled in the Akhaltsikha and started to develop their crafts and trade there. Many members of the trade organization were able to restore their craft organizations. The Silver School of Karin made its branches first in Akhaltsikha, then in Tbilisi, Alexandropol, Yerevan, Rostov-on-Don. As a rule, the skills of Armenian goldsmiths and silversmiths have usually been passed from one generation to the other. One of the important families of the masters from Karin was the family of talented painter Jacob Kojoyan. By the way, the future painter got his first lessons on their family's silver workshop. The most famous silversmiths was the Ayvazians, who later became Çiftalarian. There is historical evidence that the forefather of the family, Ağalar Ayvazyan, was the head of the gun-making factory of Istanbul in the 18th century. For his skills and mastery, he was given an honor of Master of Masters. His two sons, Hovannes and Măcărtici, went gunsmiths and goldsmiths too, and continues the family craft after moving to Akhaltsikha. There are two versions of the renaming of the dynasty from Ayvazyan to Çiftalarian. According to the first one, Ayvazyans had refined the art of double treating to such a high degree that they changed their family name to Çiftalarian, which meant double treating. And by the second version, the two brothers, Hovannes and Măcărtici, were so similar to each other that people called them Çiftlar, twins. And from this word came the surname Çiftalarian. Çiftalarians made a new quality steel for making guns and pistols and called the steel Armenian. After they started to use the technique of color hammering, and it later became their monopoly. From Akhaltsikha, the Çiftalarians moved to Tbilisi and then to Yerevan. The other well-known master from Karin was Georg Burunzuyan. He came to Akhaltsikha in the 19th century and was famous for his daggers. This is from Çeftalaryan's. His masterpieces are kept in the State Hermitage, St. Petersburg. There are very many silver and gold treasures in the museums of Armenia and other countries made in the Korean Silver School. Most of them hold the initials and names of masters. We hope that in the near future we will be able to complete information about the masters of this school. The next great and leading silver school in the history of Armenian silver art is Banvas-Burakan. Thanks to Hosek Tokat, great investment, Armenian master silversmith, now we know names of many talented masters from Van, Karapet Hayrapetsian, Hovannes Porosanjan, Gevorg Gümçpasyan, and others. It is known that in the later part of 19th century there were 120 jewelry shops and gold and silver making factories in Van. Every year Van produced thousands of silver objects which were sold in Istanbul, Europe, Africa, the United States and elsewhere. The silversmiths of Van employed various silver making techniques, mainly chasing, fine plating and niello. As a major silver making technique niello has a unique place in the history of silver school of Van. The masters of Van were depicting panoramas from Van, Church of the Holy Cross of Ahtamar, Varagavang, and others on belts, tobacco boxes, cups, engagement ring cases, and perfume boxes, and so on. Besides the panoramas, masters had put inscriptions showing the place they had presented. This is one of the typical characters of Van silversmith designs. So Josep Tokat has published a cigarette case from this master, Yepa, and I found a teaspoon in Bucharest Museum from this master. So that's why I wanted to show. This is Josep Tokat. At the end of my presentation, I want to show an object which is newly discovered. It is known that on 1910, when Sultan Mehmed V was traveling to Edirne, an Armenian master named Asatur gave him a silver maquette of the Selimiye Mosque as a present, which Mehmed V liked very much. There is an interesting coincidence. Recently we have found another maquette, which is quite unknown and will be presented for the first time. The name of this master is again Asatur Markarian. The master represents the symbol of Thessaloniki, the White Tower and its surroundings. This is another copy. The original was made by the order of the mayor of Thessaloniki and was given to Sultan. The precise time of its creation and donation is unknown, but we are sure that it was before 1910, as Thessaloniki was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire before this date. So we can decide that the maquette was made either for Sultan Hamid II or for Mehmed V. Was it the same master or not, we can't say. But I tend to think that it was the same master. Here we have the same name of the master, the same period, again maquette, and again it was made for Sultan. This is very little information about the silversmith Asadur Markarian. I had the chance to meet her granddaughter, who is 80 years old and lives in Yerevan now. The maquette belongs to her. It is known only that Asatur had lived in Thessaloniki, got married on 1884, died on 1937. As the granddaughter remembers, the studio of the master was near the Armenian church in Thessaloniki. I've tried to find some information, but could find only his tomb in the Armenian cemetery of Thessaloniki, but hope to find more information in future. The investment of Armenian goldsmiths and silversmiths in the formation and development of the silver and gold art of the Ottoman Empire is invaluable. Judging from the items, we can say that the Armenian silver and gold art of Ottoman Empire has risen to a new level of quality. With its quality, uniqueness, luxury, and beauty, the products were competitive with European models and often exceeded them. After studying the heritage of Armenian gold and silversmiths of the Ottoman Empire, it is very important to solve another problem, which is the right attributions of treasures of Armenian silver and gold art in various museums of the world. It is inadmissible for the creations of Armenian masters to be attributed to Turkish, European, or Russian masters as they are now. Thank you.
Our fourth speaker is Susan Patty, born in Washington, D.C. Patty grew up in the area, leaving for Michigan to attend Hope College, where she received her bachelor's degree in art. After working as an artist craftsperson, she began her PhD studies in cultural anthropology at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, doing field work with the Armenian community of Cyprus and later research in Armenia, Syria, and North America. She is the author of Faith in History, Armenians Rebuilding Community, various academic articles and contributions to edited volumes, as well as 2 recent books aimed at a wider audience, Who Are the Armenians? Patty's most recent book is Treasured Objects, Armenians in the Ottoman Empire 100 Years Ago, with Vasken Davidian and Gagik Stepan Sarkisyan. Her talk is about the extraordinary lives of ordinary things, material culture among Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. Susan?
Thank you, and thank you very much to the sponsors, to the organizers, and of course especially to Maggie and Vahram for all the work they've done and for inviting me. I feel a bit of an interloper here this afternoon because I don't have the art history. I have a practice of art background, but not the art history background, and from which I've learned so much today from the various lectures. My job, I think now, is to get all of you involved because I believe you all have treasures at home. They may not be of the high quality such as we've seen in these different shows today. Oh, and I better make sure I don't make the same mistake here. I'm just going to practice 1 second. Nope, nothing happened. Okay, side, the other side.
There we go.
Oh, alrighty. Okay, backwards. Fine. Okay. So I want to give just a little bit of background, and then I'm going to go into some examples. And then I'm going to end by urging all of you to become curators yourselves and interviewers in a particular way. So let me just begin, and then we'll see where we go. When the word culture is combined with art, it often becomes focused on different aspects of the arts, such as music, theater, and poetry, for example. And in this paper, though, I'm going to take a more anthropological, as you would expect, tone, including the shared social context of ideas, customs, and values or attitudes within which the arts are such an important aspect. Here, art, or the arts too, will be stretched to include objects from daily life. We're going to bring the tone way down here. Daily life that people have considered beautiful, things that they have taken time and care to produce, things which have enhanced their personal status through specialized skill and creativity, or the bartered or purchased attainment of these objects. I'll be looking at these kinds of arts and crafts from about 100 years ago, with which people traditionally surrounded themselves. And they may or may not have thought of them as art. But I must say, I have to say, I've heard today a few times that women are humble. The women whom I interviewed, and I've interviewed a lot of them who have made church vestments, for example, or done other kinds of things, and their foods are not exactly humble. They're really rather proud of what they've done. It's just that the researchers, and this is absolutely not meant at anybody here today, I mean in the past, don't ask the women about it. It's all taken for granted, I think. Art and culture coincide on many different levels. Art emerging out of culture, shaped by culture, and literally growing or bursting out from its porous boundaries. Culture itself is so complex as to encompass the arts as expressed in any particular place or time, and to be bent and altered and gradually transformed itself by the practice of the arts. We, our longings and our belongings, in every sense of the word, travel together, often physically apart, and sometimes meeting again. This paper grows out of two exhibitions which were held in London 4 years ago. The primary one was, I don't know, many of you will be familiar with Osman Koker and his book, now 2 books of photographs. He also has a fabulous traveling exhibition, which we were fortunate to have at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London for 3 months. And at the same time, we also organized, we being the Armenian Institute, organized an exhibition called Treasured Objects. We thought there must be people in the London community who had things in their family, in their homes, from pre-genocide. And indeed, we were very happy to find out that a lot of things came forward, and many more came out after the exhibition came down, of course, but some of those could be included in the book. Now, an instrumental view of material culture looks at the information that is embedded and carried forward in each object. It can follow how that object's narrative changes as it survives and circulates, and how it takes on new owners and new meanings. At the same time, the symbolic aspect of these sometimes ignored, sometimes treasured objects becomes the central focus of this paper, and also of my urging you to do something similar. Each narrative includes both practical information about daily life and multivalent emotional or psychological baggage unique to the relationships between things and their makers, owners, and their own context. The stories provide us with both kinds of narratives and also allow us to explore the complex and changing affect which they exude, the objects exude and inspire. Writers such as Pierre Nora look at objects as, quote, repositories of memory, held together by an invisible thread. The thread and the memories differ for each person, but within a culture, within a community, much is shared. It will be partly the institutionalized, the organized parts of community life that's part of our enculturation, but there are alternatives that often don't come out in the master narrative that we share with each other. And the stories of the objects often lead quickly and surprisingly into the owner's life and thinking. Our objects are used to create a meaningful universe and a tangible one. In addition, these same objects may help to stray away from this master narrative, giving alternative perspectives, even from the same person. They will somehow fit together for that person, as we are none of us completely consistent. I'd be glad to talk to anybody here who is. Now, let's turn to our first example. This is Haganush Yaganyan Hajidavitian, and her pair of scissors. Now, I told you I was not going to, we will get to some things I think we'll all believe are beautiful, but perhaps we'll all agree that this is a very utilitarian object. But for Haganush, it was incredibly important. Her story is an interesting one, and one I won't go in as deeply to the other ones. I just want to use this as an example. She was a young woman who was the youngest in the family, and there, in that town's tradition, and often elsewhere in the Armenian world at that time, earmarked to take care of the parents. So the other older sibs got married, and she was to stay at home and take care of the elderly parents. Now, and to that end, though she wanted to be a teacher and go off to school, as many girls at that time were beginning to do, her father, and I guess her mother must have agreed, said, no, you're going to stay at home and learn a trade that you can do from home. So she decided to become a seamstress. And these scissors, this is her graduation from the school, and the pair of scissors is in her hand. You can't really see it, but it's there in the picture as well. So Haganush began to do this, and this sewing has been a theme today. We're going to stay with it for a little while. The sewing for many women at that time became something that they could indeed be very proud of and could actually begin to earn some money, which was something that was developing at that time, something new, a transitional period. When this picture was taken, she would have been doing it by hand. What happened with her was a young man caught her eye. And now we all know, I know maybe don't all know, but I know from my own interviews that often people will tell me, no women and men were allowed to make their own decisions, that always it was decided by the parents and this and that. Well, somehow or another, they caught each other's eye, and the boy camped out on their doorstep, the family legend goes, and decided he was going to do a starvation thing until the father allowed him to marry the daughter. And they did get married. So this is the kind of alternative stories that come out when you start talking about the scissors. You take your way back into why she became a seamstress, and then, well, what happened next? And we go on to actually she did get married. She then did become a seamstress while she was married. The scissors then stayed with her and are now with her grandson in London. So I think it's very interesting. There are many other stories along the way, but it's interesting if you start by asking somebody about an object in their home in your interview. It's surprising how many stories can come out about that, and what then the grandmother's force of will meant to the grandson. This is also a very interesting thing. We can see, as Serimatakis tells us, that even the most dedicated of objects have varied interpretations. Artifacts as memory forms cannot only be viewed from the perspective of their sanctioned use and literal functions, but are potentially contrary, or at least allow multiple perceptions and practices. Now, soon around that time, the sewing machine made its appearance in the Middle East, and this, of course, was a hugely momentous thing for the women particularly, but also for any men who ran factories. But the sewing machine initially meant that women could make many more things more quickly in their home and for the people that they cared for. But it also meant that pre and mostly post-genocide, they could make the transition to earning more money for their family from the home by being able to create more things more quickly. This particular one was owned by a woman who, it was her mother's, and when she was still in her 80s, in the 1980s in London, she was still using this thing because, like the scissors, they have another meaning in the family as well. And for her, it was a direct line to her mother and to her aunts and anybody else who had used that machine. But it also, in the slowness, so you can see it's a handle one where you do this while you're pushing the material through. It was a slower pace of life. It was a link physically then to life in Adana, to Cyprus, and something that she wanted to be different in London. So she could sort of create this there. The material in the background actually wasn't hers, it was somebody else's, a lining material that had been removed from a coat and just kept, this kind of thing. Excuse me, because the woman just really loved that lining material and couldn't get rid of it. And again, that lining material happened to link that woman to her father, who was a store owner and who had the coat in his store. So there are many, many different ways, and then through that we learned about shopkeepers in the Middle East. The meaning of objects are activated by their origins. How did they enter the household? William Christian points to differences between objects of inheritance, objects which are gifts, which are given to you, and one's own purchase or creation. What do these reveal about each person? These are the kind of questions that can be asked in interviews. The scissors mean something different to each generation and might actually grow in meaning by association with later owners. Here we have bits of a trousseau. And the trousseaus, of course, really demonstrate the artistic skills of women in the family. And they also mark the individual maturation of a young woman. But of course, post-genocide, this custom dwindled very rapidly and then fell out of fashion grace entirely, to the point where families who do have such treasures are contemplating just throwing them away. They don't know what to do with them, and many actually already have done so. Anush Sharabeyan, writing in Armenian Folk Arts and Culture, says that sewing and embroidery, textile arts generally, provided women with an outlet for creativity, but also tied them even more securely to the household. It's a very time-consuming thing. And it's also something that was done entirely with other women within the household. But it also became a serious way to provide for the family, as I said earlier, opening up new possibilities. Now, in this case, these were made for a young woman around 1910, 1911. But when she was married, that's another story, she took this stuff to London, but she never ever wore it. By 1910 in London, these kind of things were not being worn. So she, her family now, and her family is downsizing. This is one of the families with the stuff in plastic bags. So when we did the exhibition, they gratefully brought us things to be taken care of. Sadly, in London, we don't have the kind of textile conservation that these things desperately need. But these objects, which are very, very beautiful, were actually never used. And I hope will be taken care of. Here's another example. These were used. These were used a lot, and in fact are still being used. But again, they show the kind of skill, tremendous skill, not like the church vestments we saw earlier. But again, these same women who were making this were actually also making church vestments, I learned. So this is the kind of thing you learn when you're talking with the family about these things. You find out about other things that they've made, the same sort of skills and techniques. Thank you. And then I think silk making was mentioned earlier. This is a very interesting aspect of these things. We have some silkworm cocoons there and the ways that it was made. This is from Kesab, actually. Excuse me. This is something else that's different about this. We're going all over the Ottoman Empire. Handmade silk, hand-dyed, dyed with vegetable. And then my assumption is that these are, this is a quilt that's made from other things, because this was brought over from the old country to the new and used until the death of it's my grandmother, actually, in both pictures. And at the end, she was using it for a sewing basket, sort of keeping things in her sewing in this piece of cloth. But at the earlier times, it would have been clothing, and then all brought together very carefully into a quilt. And like that one, this rug is a way of connection with a very sad past, and the kind of thing where the affect of it becomes melancholy as well as something, a sense of belonging. The father here, the grandfather, had bought this rug, and the story was passed down that he was then taken away at night. And the last time his son, the father of the woman who lent it to us, saw him, was with a man with a uniform behind him and just had his hand on his son saying a prayer. So every time she looks at this, she thinks of that sort of thing. Incense burner. We have seen many beautiful things in the churches. In the past, there were many things in the homes as well. Armenians had many home rituals for religion, which they no longer have. And today, people might have this as an ornament, but they don't use it anymore as an incense burner. But they can tell us stories about how these things were used. Similarly, actually not quite similarly, these are kutahya plates, which are being bought by Armenians now and were lent in this exhibition as sort of a salvage thing, because they, of course, this sort of thing you wouldn't have taken with you on any kind of deportations, or even if you were lucky enough to leave. But now people are going out to buy these and bring them back into their homes, thinking that they're bringing a bit of something Armenian, and similarly this lunch pail, which both brings back a past for the woman who owns this, because she was part of the people who would go out to school and have a lunch delivered to them in a hot plate by somebody with the many lunch things on them. And of course, these kind of coffee grinders, has everybody in this room used a coffee grinder like this? I mean, when I grew up, everybody had to take a turn. So these are the kind of things that we all are familiar with, and yet today, and again, this sort of tas that was used to take a bath with, to take in the hammam, where these are from the hammams, are no longer used today, and people are really not sure what to do with them. A mangal, similarly, used to heat the hearth. And finally, I just very quickly, books. Here we have an example of a man in London whose great uncle translated Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, or Tishwarner. And it just happened that it was in the library of the Armenian Institute, and we had him come and talk and show a piece of paper that had been taken out of Smyrna in somebody's shoe to get it out. It said, "Thank you," from Victor Hugo. And finally, here Levon Chilingirian showing his grandfather, Levon Chilingirian's manuscript of the Baldarak. So there are many different kinds of treasures that are found and could be made into an exhibition, or even just if you use them to interview people, you very quickly get to a very, very deep level with that person, rather than starting out just, "Please tell me about your life." I often hear people say, you know, "I wish that I gave my mother a tape recorder, and I wish she would just tell her story into the tape recorder." You know, it doesn't happen like that, I have to tell you. It really doesn't. You really need to sit with somebody. It's a conversation. And there are many different ways of doing this, and it's not too late. This is the other thing. We don't have to only interview survivors. There is a lot to be learned from people, each other, let's put it that way, from each other. And there are many different aspects of Armenian life about which we can learn. And I would like to end by saying that I think it's crucial that we support museums. We have a very, very important now transition in our lives from where the institutions are changing in our lives. And we also have these objects which need to be taken care of. And of course, museums can't accept everything, but they can always use more and more variety. But we need to provide the stories that go with those objects. Just to have a beautiful object there without the story that goes with it is really not enough. I think it's very crucial that we have these kind of in-depth interviews about the objects, about the lives of the objects. It won't all be put up on the wall, but it can be at least in the records of the museum. This is our institution of the 21st century, I believe. And we have a lot of good museum practices that we can follow and get ideas from, but I really do believe that this is something that we must do. Thank you.